r/AskReddit. Human resources employees. What are your best HR nightmare stories? I had one employee submit a form to increase her own salary. She also forged her manager's signature. Like, for real? Knew a weird dude who would sometimes do all-nighters in the office. A lady got there early one day, around 6:30 AM, and found the guy masturbating to porn at his cubicle. Crazy thing is, he wasn't fired. I guess he was good enough at working that they just moved him to another department. I used to work for a company that is an hour nightmare. Several events occurred. I was hired as a director of quality regulatory, so I come in and start sprucing up documents, policy and all the essential stuff. A VP of sales doesn't take too kindly to fixing the stuff they were lying, fraud, about and tells me in front of HR, "I'm going to make you so miserable that you quit. This job still works there." Another sales guy went into a coma, health issue, and the higher ups decided that they could fire him to keep their insurance cheaper and not pay out his life insurance. Luckily HR pointed out the potential lawsuit. After they debated the cost of the lawsuit and whether they could win, they kept him on until he passed a week later. When I left, I had my own company. They decided they owned any IP I created when I was employed there. I had no contract and non-competes aren't legal in my state. The C-level employees all were convicted of corruption in multiple countries and are in jail. The workers had races with those motorized forklifts. One did not know that there was freshly poured concrete. Got the forklift stuck in it. Damage was more than €100. Big foundation for a new storage facility. According to the union contracts, such damages are paid for by the company unless it was intentionally done. Walked into my boss's office. Told him about the situation. HMOK Shadowy. Can you please return to your office for a while? Okay. As soon as I was at my desk, I heard the loudest Gottverdammt from his office. Then my phone rang. And he told me to inform the insurance, which ended up paying less than 10k of the damage. Otherwise, the usual HR nightmare is just people not keeping their documents in order. Not in HR, but my previous senior manager was renowned for sleeping with colleagues. He was married with kids. Before I started there, I remember seeing a huge banner plastered across a footbridge that everyone leaving work by car had to drive under to get to the motorway. The sign said, "Joe Blogs," not actual name, cheating bastard. Turns out he was cheating on his wife with a team leader from another dept, and was cheating on his mistress with another team leader from yet another department. Both the team leaders found out about each other and had a massive fight in the reception of the building. By the time I started at the company, both of the team leaders were no longer working there. Ask a Manager is a good blog to read for these. Like a boss who asked his employees to donate an organ to his family. My company used to give branded gifts to our clients. One employee volunteered to drive one about an hour away, and he took another employee with him. What he didn't tell anyone is that he didn't have a license. His car was unregistered, and his brakes were bad. So inevitably his brakes failed while trying to stop at an intersection, and he totaled his car. Thankfully no one was seriously hurt, but he got into trouble when the cops came. I had a friend working at GM when HR thought it was a good idea to test everyone on the skill set needed for their department regardless of how long they were in their position. Long careers, 15, 20, 25 years were ruined because even though they worked there for a long time with a long string of great performance reviews, they didn't pass the test that measured what HR thought was required for the department. Say you're a materials expert working in a design department. You may know barely enough in the CAD system to draw a cylinder. On the other hand, given a cylinder, you can whip out all the properties that cylinder would have if it were made from aluminum, cold rolled steel, fiberglass, etc. You'd be out of your job because HR said you had to have a certain level of CAD expertise even if it wasn't relevant to your role in the design process. My favorite was the dude who would have meetings with his boss via camera. He was remote, and while they discussed his abysmal performance, he would have naked women get up from his bed and walk around. He was told this was inappropriate several times. Continued. We fired him for fraud. A separate issue that was like a Tarantino film but gives too much away here. I have a question for HR. When I was working for an assisted living hospice facility, workers would leave their shift without checking on numerous residents, leaving them soiled and in the same clothing for 2 days. I reported it to HR and they did nothing about it. Why would you choose not to do anything about that sort of situation? In the end, I had to quit. I was going home upset daily. The nightmare of an hour employee potentially causing the HR nightmare. I took a grad course meant to prep future school principals on HR stuff. One of our assignments was to ask our current principal for redacted copies of disciplinary letters they'd written to use as examples to practice writing our own. This assignment seemed sketchy from the get-go. But whatever. It's grad school and I want an A. The course was taught by the HR director who'd helped hire me and my building principal in the same school year. The principal didn't have any letters from before I started there, so just gave me a couple random ones. Somehow the professor was still surprised when I came to class knowing all the details of each write-up despite the absence of detail in the letters. The professor flipped out a little because he was worried the principal had broken some confidentiality rule. It was actually just that I happened to be friends with the two that had been written up. Teacher HR is a nightmare unto itself. Came into work early for a morning shift, work in an industrial lab. Heard noises from the back corner of the office portion of the building but can't make out what they are because of distortion. Head that way to see what was going on as I was the only one there, so I thought, at 3 AM. See my lab manager fucking the district manager, her boss, while the HR rep for the district is sitting there, enjoying the view. I noped and went to the lab and tried to forget what happened. Not crazy per se but dumb and annoying. The HR team here recently rebranded themselves the people team, presumably to seem more friendly. I just enjoy the implication that they're saying all the other teams in the business aren't people. So many stories. Lots of theft. Lots of petty bullshit. Calling anything and everything harassment and or discrimination. Generally acting like kindergartners. Looking at porn at work. I could go on and on and on. Guy got chick hooked on meth. She started going around fucking a lot of people. Drugs were done in the building. All parties got fired and the chick ended up on Springer after a few months to prove to her ex that the kid was his and not one of the other 5 guys she was fucking. I work for a general contractor's office. So many uncomfortable actions that my boss acknowledges he is doing but refuses to change. One being that he sends any of our guys that are injured on the job to get checked out and treated by his chiropractic girlfriend, who then gives him their full medical report. The company then pays her. Just a big no. Manufacturing. Long story short, the company uses some pretty dangerous equipment and machines. The manufacturing floor and warehouse had started to have some safety issues. So they decided to start doing random drug tests. 60% failed, including the best friend of the owner. This same person was responsible for several of the safety issues mentioned above and was directly responsible for 2 people being injured while on the job due to negligence on his part. So what did HR do? Nothing. The owner was one of the people that failed. Once witnessed a manager of a company try to invite kids to a casino-themed party. When he asked why, HR had to explain to him, "I didn't think it was appropriate to invite children. Since it's up, you know. There's gambling and alcohol. It's in our dangerous warehouse. It's a school night. And you know, Hooters is catering. And is that enough? Should I keep going?" Working as a temp in the leave of absence department for a major grocery chain. And the amount of people we would fire who have cancer or some other terminal condition is terrible. Having to fire people who were telling about how their rates would go up and they can't afford their house. Truly a miserable time. The amount of people who thought the law said I wasn't allowed to fire them was odd. I was a manager finishing a meeting with HR and she said the next meeting was for an employee who was caught masturbating at the urinal. Thank God I was not HR, but merely an observer. We had a new batch of staff at my retail job. Don't know who does the hiring, but it's hit and miss. We had a new black girl start. And her first shift was with a Mexican girl who within 5 minutes started arguing that the N-word, hard-R, is acceptable in Mexico. And she should be able to say it even though we were in Australia. As myself and the black girl explained. On this same day, a new guy just never returned from his lunch break. As in, he had an hour for lunch, was told to go on his break, and never returned. We had to send out half our staff to find security, center management, customer service, and every bathroom in the center to make sure he was alive. And finally, on that same day, a customer got into an argument with a long-term staff member. Turns out the customer was in fact a staff member within the company from a different location. So while a floor manager was sorting out the argument, the HR responsible had to call up the other store to find out what the fuck was happening and what the mix-up was. This thread is going to be awesome. Saw the guy blatantly lie in his recruitment form, watching him fill it out in front of me. It was total bollocks. Apparently he was 15th in line to the throne. Went to Eton. Studied at Oxford and served in the army for 9 years after training at Sandhurst. Not bad for a 21-year-old. Who had in fact spent 3 years in a young offenders institute. Battling a drug problem. I'm not a HR employee. But my dad encountered a lot of dumb shit working as a manager of enter shipping company here. For example, his star employee of the month was a common occurrence to him. A really well-rounded off guy. One day dad leaves the center for a morning because he had a horrible toothache that needed to be pulled that day. While he's gone, star employee begin to slip small packages into his pockets. With this company, most packages have insurance. But most items have monetary value. So star employee stole over 20k worth of jewelry and items over his career with enter shipping company here. Edit. We actually have no idea where this guy is these days. Maybe prison. Maybe still working for enter shipping company here. Who knows? We had a guy in one of our stores submit a grievance to us about how we were discriminating against him because we were giving a female 7 months pregnant colleague some extra breaks. She had a medical note confirming the reasonable adjustments needed, so she could sit down for an extra 5 minutes every so often because he was unable to get pregnant, so could not take advantage of the same extra breaks. Didn't really know where to start with that one. We had to terminate someone after 8 days of employment for very serious misconduct issues including sexual harassment. When I notified the employee, he started threatening me, the manager, and the entire company. He went on to send threatening emails to the VPs and other senior leadership threatening a lawsuit. His manager was concerned for her safety and the company had to hire additional security. Come to find out that the guy we terminated had recently sued his previous employer. This whole thing is still happening, so I don't have an ending to this nightmare yet. Happy Thanksgiving. Our temporary replacement manager shot a firearm in the office while showing off. He only lasted a day. I've dated 2 HR chicks in my life and they were both ugh. At first they were bubbly and seemed great. Then you start to get tired of her constant animosity towards fellow female co-workers. So much so one admitted to getting some payroll lady fired just because they didn't get along. They seem nice but then they kidnap your dog as ransom and email your mom saying that you're beating it the day after you break things off with her. Erratas. Have you heard of horrible bosses? We have human resources? I've posted this story before, so bit of a repost. I'm an HR with the federal government, and while my old office had so many antics that you could let a film crew go and get the next big sitcom, one event in particular stands out. Out of the blue, an employee at the office resigns. Her resignation letter was 5 pages long and went into lengthy detail about how her supervisor, one of the assistant directors, even went as far as to say that the supply room people treated her unfairly and ended it with some comment about how women in general were treated poorly there. While her supervisor wasn't exactly the best person to work for, she was a known problem employee and blew the events in question completely out of proportion and labeled everyone she named. Somehow a copy of this letter made it all the way to DC and at the office of the secretary, as in a member of the president's cabinet secretary. Shortly after that happened, a series of ER meetings took place and everyone had to be questioned on this. Sometimes more than once. No one was fired or reprimanded. My current job is awesome regarding HR. Little to no complaints. My last job, boy howdy. Let us see, someone got stabbed. A woman left after accusing guys of staring at her on the floor. But then what takes the cake is a guy coming to me with pictures of penises on his phone claiming another worker was sending him the pictures. He had zero proof of a co-worker sending them. But I do believe that he wasn't pulling my leg when he said they were sent to harass him. Dude had at least a dozen dick pics from a few different numbers. I suspect someone was using an app to mask their actual phone number. I told my supervisor, but nothing ever really came of it because he couldn't prove where exactly the pictures were coming from. I'm sure I have more stories, but I can't think of any ATM. There was a dude in our other facility that was going around and wiping their ass and shoving the shit back up into the toilet paper dispenser so that when the next person goes to reach. Lol, I could read this shit all day. One place I used to work. One of the upper management guys who was in charge of the warehouse would hop on the forklifts and do donuts. He had colon cancer and was always having surgeries to remove another section of colon, so he had a colostomy bag. He would like squeeze air out of his colostomy bag while he was doing donuts on the forklifts. It would waft this god-awful stench everywhere. Everyone thought it was hilarious and would immediately run outside for a smoke break until the scent dissipated. The smell was bad enough it made a co-worker puke. Also had another manager there eat 10 sacks of White Castle sliders for lunch. He ate the last 10 sack on the toilet. I have no idea how he could eat with the sounds and stenches he was emitting from his other end. It sounded like someone trying to drown Donald Duck in a puddle while tooting a tuba. No one went into that bathroom for the rest of the day. Second day on the job, I had 2 female workers tell me that the day before they were traveling in a company van with a male supervisor to another city. They claimed that the supervisor openly masturbated into their purses from the back seat. His defense was that he didn't orgasm. Owners decided to fire the 2 women for telling lies. I'm the parts manager for a dealership and my HR person breaks more infractions than anyone else. We had a new guy start for a warranty administrator position and he is from South Korea. I was in her office handing in paperwork. She also does our accounting. And she looks at me in frustration and says, can he not read English while making slant eyes? The second time came when she called my office to ask if I was still dating what's her name. My now wife, but this is while we were engaged. Because someone in the office had a crush on me. Everyone here has dope stories. The best story I got is a guy lying about when he was available to work. This question is made for Toby from The Office. Obligatory, not in HR. But the director of HR and several other senior managers, including the controller, was encouraging me to sleep with one of the married accountants. I didn't realize it at all, since I'm kind of oblivious like that. But apparently she had the hots for me since I had signed on. Rumors were floating that same dear of HR was fooling around with one of the other department heads. Rumor only. But they spent an awful lot of time in each other's company that really couldn't be explained otherwise. The recirculation of B classes. The manager called me a lemon head. Not HR myself. But I know one time when HR completely failed. I worked at a chain that regularly hires kids in high school. One day this 16-year-old girl and her mom start working at my store. They switched from another store in the chain cause another employee in his 40s made inappropriate comments. He would make them to customers and co-workers, including this 16-year-old girl. So her mom and her came to our store. Within 2 months, that dude gets transferred to our store. Needless to say, he eventually got transferred back out. But that was some terrible HR work. My friend was doing hiring for a staffing agency during college. A guy who we went to high school came in looking for a job. He told the candidate that he had 2 jobs. One paid $10 an hour and the other paid $11. The only thing was that the $11 an hour job requires a drug test. And if you fail the drug test you can't get either. He said that he wanted the $11 an hour job. Now we knew him well enough to know that he liked smoking. So my friend reiterated the drug test fail rule. Dude said he was good on Friday to take the test Monday. Come Monday he took the drug test. Pissed hot for weed, cocaine, amphetamines, and some other shit that gets out of your system in 48 hours. I was in HR for a few years. I could write a book. Crazy times. I dealt with sudden deaths. Crazy people trying to hit me when attending their disciplinary. A suicide attempt. A young employee going blind. A man with special needs going crazy and holding a knife to someone's throat. Turns out he was in a forced marriage. A woman who was off long-term sick due to being raped. And an applicant for a job who told me that he was a half-blind, half-deaf, toothless, bald hermaphrodite, and that was actually totally true. Their name was Suzanne. I also met 911 and got sexually harassed. Fun times. I don't work in HR. But they probably had a moment of silence when I dropped racism and discrimination case at their email inbox one day. They were scrambling for a few days trying to contain the fire. Possibly. Wife's first week at one HR job, hospital. Janitor gets caught masturbating in the parking lot in his car by a patient heading in for treatment. At another job, she had to field a union grievance about goats taking people's jobs. The university had hired rental goats to perform brush clearing on a small piece of land they wanted cleared. Union argued brush clearing was their work, not the goats. This one time my company, large retailer, decided to make me the HR manager on top of my other, already stressful management position. I did not apply for it. I have not been trained in it. And I somehow have to navigate my way through a myriad of legal pitfalls and liabilities. There is no bigger HR nightmare. This is a nightmare. Niche London HR consultancy, a madhouse. Owner regularly invited consultants and support staff to join him and wife, big coke habit, also worked for the company, for threesomes. Everyone knew what was going on. When I left, I handed an envelope to the head of HR and told her that I hoped she wouldn't ever have to open it, but if a certain ex-employee were to contact the firm, she would have too. When you are somewhere like this, I follow processes. I document everything, and I do not let anyone get anything on you. My sister works in HR for a utility company and almost all her horror stories are about the engineers. Most are completely normal, but a few live up to the stereotype of having no social awareness. Apparently one day, the worst of these engineers was giving a presentation to some higher-ups. One of these executives came from a non-technical background and mispronounced gigawatts. I guess the engineer immediately interrupted with no. It's gigawatts. It rhymes with near. I feel like staffing has some of the craziest stories. I'm a recruiter about 1.5 years and I've had over 60 employees that I've personally managed. With the top 15 that were bananas. People getting fired with the first week. Inappropriate behavior. Fraud. All sorts of stuff. I think employee relations at large companies has the 100% the craziest and best stories. Not in HR, but we recently had a situation where a guy masturbated in the plant bathroom, then threw his cum on a girl shortly afterwards. Before obviously being escorted out, they were talking with him and he said, "Hey, she should feel lucky I chose her," as if that was the utmost compliment. Fucked up. But the funniest part of the story the supervisor told me was the girl went to him and said, "I've got cum in my hair," and at first he was just like QHH, like residual. Probably that time I got stranded on a spaceship. I hope at least one person gets that reference. In all seriousness though, props to HR people for dealing with everyone's bullshit. My job is a constant HR nightmare. Boss has slept with co-worker A. Co-worker A is married to co-worker B. Co-worker B plus A have been married, unhappily, for 10 years or something now. B has no idea. Even though B invites boss over for dinner once every other week. Boss is now dating new co-worker, my best friend lol, and has already gifted her $2,000. Despite another co-worker suffering from cancer and barely being able to pay the bills when he was still working. My other boss, who owns the lesser half of company, has called me a narcissist in a meeting. Told me literally there are no such things as business ethics. That's barely the past couple months. Been there for 4 years. Sorry, not HR. We don't have one. Edit. Got tons more stories if interested. But heading off to work now actually. Not from HR. But I work for a big corporation and I saw a racial event unfold between Subject A, an African American and the offended, and Subject B, a Middle Eastern Arab the offender. Where B started calling A the N-word. In front of a bunch of other people who started telling him to stop. But B kept going, telling others to shut up and that he was entitled to say the N-word and offend A with it because he wasn't white and A shouldn't feel offended about it. Subject A really controlled himself and left the building. B chased him around the building, still provoking him, and after A left, came back and tried to explain to the others why he did it. Everyone involved sent a letter to HR explaining the events. I had a talk with his manager and HR. B was sent home for a week while HR did the investigation. When B came back, he was called to a meeting room. Got a strong reprimand from HR and that's it. He kept working for a year. Got into other issues with people. Nobody wanted to work with him. Until he started intimidating women, physically and verbally. That's when his manager and HR finally decided to get rid of him. But still took them almost a month. Trainer was gay and his team lead is gay and his manager is a lesbian. All true. And he doesn't feel comfortable working around all these gays and lesbians. The HR employee asks him if anyone has ever sexually harassed him. Which he says they haven't. She then says, so you want me to fire these employees? Strictly based on their sexual orientation. Just so you don't feel uncomfortable? He says yes. After which she tells him to leave the office. She then calls in his manager and talks with her about it. He ends up quitting by the end of the week. We had a woman show up to work in a fishnet shirt and a black bra. Which basically meant she was wearing a bra around the office because the fishnet did nothing to hide her skin. Her male manager came to me with an exhausted look on his face and asked me to come talk to his employee about dress code. I had to take the 40-plus-year-old woman into an office and explain she had to go home and change. And no, she wouldn't be paid during her time away from the office because she violated dress code. She demanded I call my boss, regional HR director, because she said I was lying and being a racist. We made the call. She got sent home for the full day without pay. And we wrote her up for it. She left shouting about how I was a racist and she was going to file a complaint. This lady eventually got fired for a bunch of other insanity, including having sex with a co-worker in our parking lot with the door open. I'm very glad I no longer work in HR. Not really an our situation. But when I was in the use of our IG was basically HR. So I served on the honor guard at Hill in northern Utah. We had a nice female airman who wanted to be on the honor guard so badly that when she didn't make the cut, you go through an interview process which your former unit needs to be called and they have to say you're not a shitbag. She complained to the IG that half the group sexually assaulted her at different times. It didn't help that she told our MSGT that she would do that if she didn't make the honor guard. Naturally, the IG had to investigate. Not really sure what the outcome of that was. I separated before the investigation came to a conclusion. This question is made for Toby from The Office. Just a little tip for anybody in charge of new hires: take your stack of applications and throw half of them in the trash. Because you wouldn't want to hire an unlucky person. Those who can't teach. Those who can't teach pay. Those who can't teach pay go into HR. HR. What a useless department full of useless people. Toby. My boss. I work for a paper company in New York and my boss thinks he's funny but he's not. He gets on everybody's nerves and he has some sort of never-ending grudge on me. This is why I don't like anybody named Michael. I work in recruitment, so not exactly HR. A guy had applied for a job that required a DBS check, police check. He filled the DBS and all his other checks flew through. The DBS came back as he had committed a crime in the past. Now on our end only the guy who will be applicant's manager and a senior in our department can see the DBS result. He called the department unhappy the job had been withdrawn. He then sent a long email in begging for another chance. He said when he was 17 he beat 2 women up then threatened the cops with a gun. We're in the UK so guns are pretty rare, especially in the 1970s. He went into detail about the attempted rape. This dude wanted a job in a hospital. It's a no, mate. I was sitting in the HR office with one of the members of HR. I was waiting on her to finish a form so that we could go eat lunch. Suddenly, this guy comes in. He was a young temp employee and had only been there a week or so, and says he has something he needs to talk about. I start to get up to leave when he blurts out that he doesn't like that fact that there are so many gays and lesbians working in the company. Once he says that, I sit right back down. The HR employee asks him to clarify and he goes on about how his trainer was gay and his team lead is gay and his manager is a lesbian. All true, and he doesn't feel comfortable working around all these gays and lesbians. The HR employee asks him if anyone has ever sexually harassed him, which he says they haven't. She then says, so you want me to fire these employees strictly based on their sexual orientation, just so you don't feel uncomfortable? He says yes. After which she tells him to leave the office. She then calls in his manager and talks with her about it. He ends up quitting by the end of the week. My friend who worked in HR told me about her old job where the boss had drilled a hole from his office through to the ladies' changing rooms and was perv whacking it every chance he could get. They found out because someone saw the light through the hole as he took the cover off for a peek. He denied everything and they had to take a DNA sample from the carpet under the hole, which confirmed it was him and that he had indeed been whacking away. Thanks for watching, mate. Make sure to smash that star button for more high quality content.